The topic I'm going to cover today is Creditors Reconciliation. You need to remember that you have done this in grade 11, so this is actually recapping what you covered there. Alright, starting with the purpose of Creditors Reconciliation, the first thing is to calculate the correct amount owed to each creditor. We don't want to underpay or overpay our creditor, and by doing Creditors Reconciliation, we can make sure that we are paying the correct amount. The second thing is to keep good internal control over creditors, to keep your eye out on when you need to pay back money, whether you're sticking to the credit terms, whether you're taking advantage of discounts, etc. And then thirdly, to detect errors or fraud. Alright, today I'm going to look at external reconciliation. The reason why I call it external reconciliation is because we're taking the creditor statement, which is an external document, and we're comparing it with our creditor's ledger, in other words, our internal records. So the first thing you need to do then is do that comparison. So you take your creditor's ledger, which is drawn up by the business, and you compare it to the external record, which is the statement that you receive from the supplier. And the reason for doing this is you want to identify the differences. Once you've done that, you ask yourself the very important question, who has not made the entry or who has made the error? Now there's only two answers here. It can either be the business, which I always refer to as us, or it could be the creditor, which I always refer to as them. And when I go through the worked example in a minute, I'll show you how to use us and them to give you a far better chance of getting this work correct. If we've made the error, we'd need to correct in the general journal, and then we need to post to the creditor's ledger. In other words, update the creditor's ledger. The second thing we need to do is we need to draw up the creditor's reconciliation statement that contains all things that they haven't recorded. We would then send that creditor's reconciliation statement together with payment, showing the creditor how we arrived at the amount that we are paying them. And obviously, once you've fixed up all the errors and differences, the balances must be equal. Alright, going now to a worked example. The first one asks you to calculate the correct amount due to beta and also prepare a creditor's reconciliation statement to confirm that this amount is correct. Alright, before I even start, the first thing I suggest you do is you identify who we are and who they are. So if you read this, it was taken from the books of Alf's Traders. In other words, Alf's Traders is us, and the beta creditor is them. Now bear that in mind when we come to do these questions now. Alright, so if you have a look at the answer sheet here, we've got the calculation of the amount due to beta. Right above that, us, and in brackets put the name of the business as well. And then the creditor's reconciliation statement will contain all things that they haven't recorded, and I suggest you put their name above it as well. Because then when you read through the differences now, the first thing you just need to decide is who made the error. Once you've decided that, then if it's us, you'll put it under the calculation here. If it's them, you will record it in the creditor's recon statement. Now, because you've written the names alpha and beta, that's going to make it easier for you to do. And then the next thing, once you've got the amount in the correct column, you then decide whether you need to add or subtract. So let's start. An invoice received from beta appeared as 1,005 Rand in the creditor's ledger and on the statement as 4,005 rather, and the statement is correct. That means they are right, which means we are wrong. So the difference between those two numbers is 3,000. Okay, the 3,000 Rand we have to add to what we owe, because we said we owed 1,005, but in actual fact we owed 4,005. Beta recorded a credit note issued to another business on the statement of Alf. So in other words, they've put something onto our statement that should have gone into another creditor's statement. So they made the error there. Now if it's a credit note, that decreases the amount that is owed. So they decreased our account with something that we didn't actually return. So that is why we have to add back the 240. We didn't return anything, so they decreased our account by mistake, so we're going to add the 240 there. Alright, then the next one. Beta omitted to record a settlement discount on ALF's statement. Then they give the EFT payment of 893 was correct, and a 6% discount had been granted. The first thing here you need to do is need to calculate the amount. Now, if the amount after the discount is 893, that is 94% of what was owed in total. In other words, 100 minus the 6%. So the easiest thing to do here, and I've done it at the bottom here, is to take that should be 893. That is 94%, so divide by 94, and we want 6%, which is then what you multiply by. So divide by what you have times by what you want. And they forgot to give us that discount there, so therefore you're going to have to decrease the amount owed. Sometimes in some of the answers they put a minus sign there. I prefer to use brackets, but you just need to be guided by what the question actually says you must do. Okay, so we decrease what we owe to Beta because that discount must deduct from what we actually owe in total. Then ALF did not record an invoice received from Beta as the stock was never delivered. If we never received the stock, we shouldn't have recorded anything. They obviously did record that invoice, but they never sent us the stock. So Beta is wrong, they are wrong, and you need to cancel that invoice, which is going to decrease the amount that you owe. Then the next one, Beta charges customers for delivering stock. An amount of 180 for delivery appeared in the statement as 160 in error. They made the error. They charged us 160. They should have charged us 180. So we owe them an extra 20 Rand here. And then an EFT payment issued to Beta in part payment of an account appeared in the creditors ledger as 508, but the correct amount is 805. If you are issuing an EFT means you're paying back. That decreases what you owe them. We said we owe them 508 less, but we actually owe them 805 less. So therefore you must decrease by a further 297. And then when you add up these two things here, can you see the balance are now the same? If you're doing an exam and those balances are not the same, you need to be disciplined and leave that and carry on with the paper. You can always come back and try and find out what error you've made. So you mustn't spend time on trying to get these two balances the same, because then what can end up happening is things that you had right you start to make wrong. Alright, then the next is a couple of theory questions. Explain by why ALF's traders and Beta record transactions from the opposite point of view. Alright, obviously ALF is owing money to Beta, so in our books Beta is going to be a liability, but in ALF's books we owe them money. So for them, we are going to be their debtor, which is an asset. So we owe them, it's a liability. They are owed by us, it's an asset for them. That is why they'll see them from the opposite point of view. And then the last question here. You suspect that one of the employees is ordering stock for the business and then keeping some of the stock for himself. Briefly explain how division of duties could be implemented to prevent this from happening in the future. Division of duties is where you divide the task up into several different areas of responsibility and use different people for each. So one employee could make the order, the next could check the delivery of stock when it arrives, count all the stock, check that it agrees with what was ordered, and then the third employee could actually report the purchase. It's not to say that these three people couldn't get together and still do what the other employee had been doing, in other words, stealing stock, but it's more difficult when you've got more people involved. So that was external reconciliation. You also need to know how to do internal reconciliation. That's where you take internal records. So in other words, you're going to take the creditors control account and compare it to the creditors list from the creditors ledger. You can do exactly the same with debtors, so I'm going to cover this in a debtors video at a later stage because the method or approach is exactly the same. Alright, the next video will be another activity on creditors reconciliation. Thanks.